Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. Well, welcome to Face to Face, and we have another special guest today, Peter Blakely from Blakely & Associates. Thanks, Peter, for being with us today.
Pleasure, David. Thanks for inviting me.
So you're kind of a pretty interesting guy. So 20 years in fundraising at least running Blakely & Associates.
Yep.
You're former president, now chairman of the board, is that right?
Yep.
So you're staying in.
Yep.
You're
Staying
not
involved.
Fully, and I walked in the door, I saw you sitting in your office there, so clearly you've got some space here. You still have some real estate?
I still have some real estate.
Okay, this is good.
Yeah.
And what I think really interests me about today's podcast, is obviously talking about fundraising and databases and relationship management and so on, donor fatigue, those kinds of things. But you just returned from Mount Everest's base camp.
I did.
Which on one level sounds like you didn't quite make it.
Well, nobody did this year, unfortunately.
Right. Was that a weather?
No, that was due to the unfortunate tragedy. There was a significant avalanche, actually, about 2 days before we left Canada to go to Kathmandu.
That soon, eh?
And it was on the. We left on the 19th, and it happened on the 17th of April.
So that shuts down the mountain, basically?
Well, it's never happened before, fortunately. This was the largest single tragedy on the mountain. 13 confirmed lost Sherpa, and 3, as of the last I heard, they had not found 3 bodies. So a total of 16 people perished, which is the largest single tragedy on Mount Everest in its history. So normally when these tragedies occur, there are smaller numbers and people carry on. It is unfortunately one of the realities of expedition climbing. You're dealing with nature, you're dealing with many, many unknowns. And so normally, they carry on. But there's been a lot of discussion and concern that's been expressed over the years by the Sherpa in terms of their compensation. And not just what they're paid, but in the event that something should happen to them, what happens to their families.
Right.
And so the Sherpa all banded together as a result of this and said that basically they were going to go on strike.
I was just going to say they're unionizing.
Yep. And so the government took the next step and basically canceled all of the permits. Everybody climbing the mountain has to have a permit.
I would imagine, yeah.
Anybody entering the park, you have to have a permit. So even when we went to base camp, we have a permit. Not particularly. It's expensive as an expeditioner if you're going to the top of Everest. I don't know the exact amount, but it's in the thousands.
And form a tax.
It is, absolutely. It's to keep the mountain, it's to provide for the local people, it's to provide for healthcare, schooling, and so on and so forth. So the government did make the decision to cancel the permits for this year. So it's going to be interesting next year as to what has happened. There were some discussion about some of the plans that have been put into place, which by our standards are very minimal. Mm-hmm. They're talking in the terms of like $400 or $500 for a family and small scholarships for the children and so on and so forth. Again, by our standards, very limited, but in their terms, relative to what it does cost, it will provide some assistance. So whether that gets completely resolved, I think that the loss to Nepal as a country for the climbing this year, I think there's something like 100 or so people, 150 people that go a year. So that's a fair amount of money. So I think the government will be looking to, find some way to resolve it and get things back on track.
Yeah, I would imagine it costs thousands of dollars to climb a mountain like Mount Everest. I would think. I mean,
well, the going price has been around $65,000 US.
Wow.
Yep.
And that's to hire your Sherpas?
That's everything.
Hotels?
No. That's from the time you enter the park until the time you leave the park.
So that's not even your 2-week stay before you go, or your recovery after? Or
No.
Wow.
No, that's from. But that, I mean, it takes those climbing Everest, and I'm not an expert on that by any stretch of the imagination. But they will spend in the vicinity of 6 to 8, 9 weeks in the process. Most of that is acclimatizing and waiting for the opportunity to actually make the ascent. So the food, the support, where the base camp is actually on a glacier. It's on the base of the what's called the Kimbu Glacier.
Okay.
And so that obviously changes every year. So everything has to be taken up and everything has to be removed each year.
It's crazy. I got to tell you, no interest for me, zero. You know, I don't even think I'd want to have a snowball fight in Nepal. You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds crazy to me.
Well, the geography is absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah, I bet it would be.
It's just, it's magical.
Yeah,
it truly is.
So you spent several weeks in
we were 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yep.
So you were going on behalf of, before we get into some of those other details, but it was a kind of a fundraising thing.
Yes, it was.
Too,
for the Sir Edmund Hillary Foundation, which was actually started by a chap by the name of Zeke O'Connor here in Canada.
Yeah, I thought it was.
And Zeke's an ex-football player, Toronto Argonaut football player, and the biggest set of hands on an individual I've ever seen in my life. So that's why he was a receiver.
Good fundraiser,
and a
really,
good one, a good fundraiser. That's right. He can catch it. And so he had the opportunity to meet Sir Edmund Hillary a number of years ago, and on his passing decided that it would be appropriate to start the foundation as a way to give back. And so the Sir Edmund Hillary Foundation actually funds 3 different projects. One is an environmental project, so they have 2 nurseries. So replanting of trees, because there has been some cutting down of trees for firewood and so on and so forth over the years, so replanting of that. The other is a school, the Sir Edmund Hillary School, which actually is only partially funded now by Sir Edmund Hillary Foundation. Many world governments representing countries who have sent teams to Nepal to climb Everest are also funders of that school. And the third one is the hospital, which is a fantastic hospital, the Kundi Hospital, and it is amazing to see. It's amazing to see.
Is this really to help support the Sherpas and their families, or does this go beyond?
Oh, it goes beyond. It reaches way beyond. Yes. Yeah.
So this is a way for climbers, people who are, in a sense, using Nepal and its resources, a way for us to give back.
To give back. Oh, no question about that. That's exactly what it is.
Was this a trip for you and your daughter?
My daughter and I. It's always just a dream of mine to
see Everest.
I've done Kilimanjaro a couple of times, and
a couple times.
A couple of times.
You're a bit of a keener.
And Everest is, it's just been one of my dreams to actually see. I mean, I've seen a million pictures, as most of us, videos and YouTubes and all the rest of it. But to actually see it. Yes, there was. Yes, yep.
I remember some crazy shot of an aluminum ladder.
Over a crevasse.
And they're walking across.
Yep.
Yeah, good luck with that, you guys.
So it's just always been a dream of mine. I have the utmost regard and respect for those who undertake the climb, because it's an incredible physical and mental exercise where you can plan everything to the nth degree and you never know what is going to happen. So it's not only your planning ability, the ability to plan and execute on the plan, but when the unexpected happens, how do you respond to that and how do you react and move forward?
So does that notion appeal to the businessman in you, or does it appeal to the Indiana Jones figure?
No, I think it applies to the businessman in me. Yeah, definitely.
Really?
The entrepreneur in me, because as an entrepreneur, you're not quite like an expeditioner, but you, as you start a business, again, a good business plan needs to be developed, but there are going to be curves and changes along the way that one needs to.
Well, you can't plan for everything.
You cannot.
Right? Nobody does. Nobody can.
So whether it's to deal with people, whether it's to deal with clients, whether it's to deal with other external forces, who knows? You know, I mean, in our business, direct mail has been historically the core of the business. Canada Post goes on strike.
Right.
What do you do?
Yeah.
Can't control that.
Horseback.
So
I
how do you?
believe.
Yeah, horseback. Paul Revere. Here we go.
Yeah. So are you as successful of a fundraiser for yourself as you are for others?
I
actually do well on this trip?
I did quite well.
I bet you did.
I did quite well.
I'm sure you have a few connections.
Well, I was including yourself, David. I had a wonderful, about 250 people.
Oh, that's amazing.
Came forward, and I raised
fantastic.
Just shy of $10,000.
Nice.
My original goal was 5,000.
Right.
So
that's pretty good.
I was very, very, very pleased with that. It was a
excellent.
pretty significant.
Will you go on to work with the Sir Edmund Hillary Foundation?
Well, I'm going to stay involved for sure.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Karen O'Connor is the current president,
And they do an
we've
annual
had some
event
discussion.
in
They do an
Toronto.
annual gala. They do one in Calgary.
Good. Is it
and they do a golf-
SirEdmundHillary.org?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure if the listeners just searched, and we'll put a link to it on Peter's bio, but
great.
But in an article, I believe that is coming out about you, or you were just recently interviewed by
Yes,
the
in
Association
AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals,
Yeah, good.
right on.
So we'll put a couple of those
Great.
links on the podcast. So I'm dying to ask you about something that drives me crazy. This whole notion of donor fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sick of hearing about it.
Yep.
This is my sense. And, or compassion fatigue, I guess, is the other one. And, don't bother knocking on my door. Don't ask me for any more money because I'm done. I'm
Right.
tapped out. I'm stressed
Yep.
financially. But
Yep.
when I look at the numbers and I look into Imagine or I look at CRA stuff, I mean, the average is pretty low, Peter. I mean, the average Canadian family gives, what, $375 a year?
Something in that vicinity, yes.
And it depends on the documents you look at. And
Yes,
I
and
guess
how it gets. But those are the registered documents.
Okay.
And what is, there's, I mean, who knows what the unregistered amounts are when you think of, person on the street, event that you go to here, tea party there, whatever somewhere else, and you're giving
Liquor
$1,
store,
$10,
do you wanna give
$5.
$2 on the
Yeah,
way
do you
out?
want to support, whatever the cause might
Yeah.
be? Absolutely. So, I mean, I would venture to say that number represents maybe 50% of what the true number is. I mean, I don't have a sense, and that's just a gut feeling,
Sure.
quite frankly.
Yeah.
But I mean, we all know that every time we turn around, you talk about donor fatigue. I mean, Canadians are incredibly generous people. Our belief in and our trust in philanthropy is incredible. It's one of the things over the 20 years of my being in this business that I am continually amazed by. I mean, when I started in the business, to think, and I've had discussions with many of my competitors about this, we talk about it, back in the old days, you could send out a crummy old piece of paper on a crumpled up envelope and basically say nothing in a letter other than you're appealing on behalf of, a legitimate cause, and the money would come pouring in. I mean, it's incredible.
Right.
It just boggles my mind. It really does. So Canadians, we're blessed in so many ways in this country, and that is just an extension of that.
Would you say,
fortune.
Peter, that that's a small portion of Canadians?
No.
Or would you say
No, I think it's very, very broadly based. Very broadly based.
So how does that line up with the CRA numbers?
Well, again, I think, David, those really only represent what people record on their tax returns.
Right.
And in Canada, one of the reasons that people give is not because of the tax benefit.
Interesting.
In the United States, where you can write off all of the donation amount that you make, it is a greater motivation to give. But in Canada, where there's only a portion of the amount that you donate that is actually tax deductible, it is just not a reason that people support any cause. People are giving because they believe in a cause, because it means something to them for whatever that reason is, and that is the real challenge in this business that makes it from the agency side.
Yeah, sure.
As far as I have always felt, it is, I think I've said this to you, it is the best business in the marketing world that exists, because at the end of the day, if I'm selling, if I'm selling automobiles, or if I'm selling life insurance, or if I'm selling windows, or whatever it is, I can do a pretty good job of figuring out what it is that my customer needs.
Oh,
I can
yeah,
identify the need,
Yeah.
and then it's just a question of being there at the right time with the right product at the
Usually
right price.
pretty quantifiable, right? Usually.
Far more quantifiable
Yeah,
in charity. Charity, and we see this every day of the week. People give for so many different reasons, and that is really the new frontier in fundraising, and that is the attitudes and the motivations that are stimulating people's giving. And that's the area, historically, the company, our company, Blakely, has grown by the use of statistical data on sort of what people's historical giving patterns have been. And therefore, if that's the pattern, then we capitalize on that pattern, and we're able then to move that forward to encourage, either larger gifts or more frequent giving or different types of giving. But in today's marketplace, what the directions more the company's looking to move into, as is the for-profit world, and that is the whole notion of motivations and attitudes. So, and those are, a million and one.
Well, they're limitless, really,
they are
aren't
totally.
they?
That's
and
right.
I would think they're constantly shifting.
Very much
Yeah,
so.
and I mean, from my perspective as an international development guy, I would go there. Relief and development. You got an earthquake, well, people will,
Yep.
lean towards donating to that, perhaps. And
That's
then there's
right.
an Ebola crisis, and maybe they lean towards that.
Toward
and
that.
then
That's
something
right.
happens here at home locally, and so on. And so,
Yep.
yeah, it's. There's no question the nonprofit sector is a difficult field. So what about this compassion fatigue, donor fatigue? Is it that companies, organizations that are coming to you are just asking too often? Are they asking too much? I mean, that's sort of maybe a difficult question for you to answer because it's your business. But am I getting too many letters in the mail? I mean, I don't personally, because I work in the field, I don't feel it.
Right.
What I feel is, wow, what a horrible ask this is when I get something in the mail.
And the one thing people will always, and we hear this from people who are not directly involved with the business, but recipients, is they may at times say, well, and particularly when they're involved with a charity, they get very nervous around the frequency with which the contact with a donor occurs.
Yep.
And I always like to use the example of the churchgoer who every Sunday or every Saturday, as the case may be, the plate is passed around. So that's 52 times a year. And on top of that, there are special asks, and they're this and they're that, and the next thing. There are all kinds of things going on in religious organizations. So I've always been a believer that you can never ask too much. And if you are with a particular individual or a particular group of individuals, my experience has always been that the donors, they'll tell you. And then you must respect that. And that is the breakdown. And I talk to more people who say, I have told ABC charity, don't send this to me. I've crossed it out and sent it back. Do not mail me anymore, or do not call me, or do me whatever.
Yeah.
And the organization continues to do it.
Right.
That is the failing.
Yeah.
So the failing is not listening to the donor. When you listen to donors and you respect the donor wishes, then you will not, in my experience, you will not experience donor fatigue. Donors want to know if a donor is engaged with an organization, and engagement doesn't necessarily mean giving money. There are a lot of different ways, particularly in today's market, to engage with an organization.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that you can engage with a donor, and the more ways, in fact, that you engage with the donor, the more connected that individual will be. And now we start talking about loyalty and stewardship and all these other sort of elements of the fundraising mix. So I am not a believer of true donor fatigue, because I quite frankly, I have never seen it.
Well, for you, it sounds to me like poor relationship management, really.
It is
what it comes down to.
More so.
And
that's
the whole
right.
notion of not listening. I mean, a good development worker listens.
Yep.
Listens to the folks on the ground who are looking for assistance or help or capacity building of whatever kind.
Yep.
But so often, as we've all seen in this field, we don't listen to
That's
well.
right.
We come in with our solutions and our big white Western vehicles.
And that's not what the need is.
It's so not the need.
That's
And
right.
More often than not. I mean, maybe in some cases it has been, or in relief settings, maybe, tsunamis and earthquakes and things like that. But so poor relationship management then is a problem for. So for you, it really is about managing relationships in an appropriate. I'm trying to be as human and genuine about this as I can way. That for instance, so Robert Ian Peacock has written a book called FaceTime: Relationship Philanthropy is the subtitle.
Yep.
So I mean, you're in the business of numbers to some degree.
Right.
You're pretty detached in a way from the relationships. So I guess maybe my question is, how do you not become cynical about this field when you're really dealing mostly with numbers?
Well, the numbers are just one of the components. At the end of the day, and Rob talks about this, and everybody who's been in the business for any period of time talks about this, people give to people.
Right.
So numbers may help you better understand some of the characteristics of an individual or a group of individuals, but at the end of the day, it's the connection that one individual has. This is why direct mail letters are one person to one person. Another fight we often have with organizations is they want two signatures on a letter. Well, how often do you receive a letter from a friend of yours with, the husband and wife's signature on it?
Yeah.
It's just not the way it's done. It's one to one.
Yeah.
Why telephone works the way it does? Because it's one person talking to one person.
Right.
Now you get into some of the newer channels and social marketing and social media, and it's changing that a bit.
Right.
So it is broadening a bit. But the numbers are only there, and I believe will continue to be there. And there are lots of arguments about how those numbers are get used and what numbers they are and how they're put together and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, however that's all taking place, you use those numbers as a component only. It's not.
It's a tool in the toolbox. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. How do you communicate to donors as a World Vision or a UNICEF or a Plan or whoever that you are more than a number? You're not just a direct mail piece here. You're not just number 1222.
Good question. By listening to what the donor is telling you, and this is where increased use of personalization in all forms of communication is starting to occur more.
Mm-hmm.
So a good example where this doesn't take place is in the for-profit world, where a bank or a credit card company will solicit you. Well, you've already got a mortgage, and you're getting a letter saying, a great deal on a mortgage. Well, don't you know, they're not listening.
Right.
So it's the same thing in the not-for-profit world. If somebody, and we've been testing this, quite extensively over the past number of years, and we're seeing positive changes as a result of it. If I can use one example, World Wildlife Fund. If World Wildlife Fund does an acquisition looking for new donors, and it's talking about the polar bear, for example, and so somebody sends in a donation, support, that's meaningful to them. And then I go back 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, whatever the time, and I start talking about global warming. That may be what's important to World Wildlife. Understand that, and that may be one of their cornerstones of existence and development and support. But that's not why the donor originally supported the cause.
Right.
And we've tested this where we've gone back and we've talked about global warming on one hand, and we've talked about polar bears again on the other. Surprise, surprise. The polar bear gets a better response rate.
Right.
That's not to say that the donor doesn't care about other elements of what the charity is doing, in this case World Wildlife or whatever the charity is. It's just that you need to build the relationship and get them more engaged with it before you start flogging what's important to you.
Polar bears are dying because of climate
That's
change.
right.
Or this is another factor.
That's right.
You might want to help us with this as well.
Yep.
But that could take a year or 2
Yes.
or 3 or whatever the case might be.
That's correct.
And this is just an extension of you saying, listen to what the donor says.
Listen to what
Yeah.
the donor is saying.
Do you think too many nonprofits, too many NGOs are mixing messages? You look at some of the larger nonprofits, like the UNICEFs and so on of the world, they do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to wonder sometimes if is it really just all about the donor dollar? Or are they really being, what is that phrase? Mission drift.
Yep.
Are they really being driven by their vision? Are they really being driven by clean water or polar bears or food security issues in the local community? Or do they just want to be able to hire a new fundraising consultant and therefore they need X amount of dollars? Sorry, I'm the one going cynical on you now.
No. And I think there is certainly some of that. We know, we speaking generically now for the industry, we know that certain things touch people more than other things do. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to raise money, then you have to talk about those things. And a good case in point is in the world of healthcare, hospital fundraising, where, when we start talking about tangible needs, then the ability to raise money is significantly greater than when we talk about what's known as unrestricted funding. So we just need money because we're going to use it here, we're going to use it there, we're going to use it somewhere
else. Peter, is
else.
a tangible need, would you also call that a designated gift?
No.
You wouldn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
A designated gift is when somebody says, I will fund this for you to that level, whatever the dollar amount. That's designated. And what lots of organizations don't want is they don't want designated funding because often the popular designated items become overfunded.
Right.
And that creates a problem. So we will often use designated items as an example of how the money will get used. But we're very careful to say that we're not necessarily going to use the funds for this piece of equipment or that project or whatever.
Right.
So it does, in fact, become undesignated funding. Because
funding a tangible need is way more user-friendly and successful for an organization.
No question about that.
Well, not only from a fundraising point of view, but also from implementation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Gives you more flexibility, more freedom, and so on.
That's right.
And if what you say is true, which I love, by the way, is what was the line you used about Canadians trusting in philanthropy?
Yes.
If they trust in the organization, then it's a good investment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of why you're giving to them in the first place, right?
That's right.
You trust them.
Charities,
they know how to.
Charities, by and large, are incredibly good stewards
Nice.
of donors' money.
It's nice to hear.
There is no question about that. Unfortunately, as is often the case, one bad apple, and everybody thinks that that's the whole industry.
Right. Well, and those are the stories we hear.
Yep.
Right.
Well, that's what the media picks up on,
it's
and that's
real.
what everybody goes crazy. But
Well, what I love is I just read recently, I haven't gotten in Foreign Policy, an American magazine, is now showing apparently that there is research to suggest that aid is actually providing tangible, sustainable, measurable results as far as development is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, over the last 7 to 8 to 9 years, pretty much since William Easterly's White Man's Burden, and then Dambisa Moyo wrote a book called Dead Aid, how all money to Africa is just a waste.
going, yeah.
So now we've got research saying, well, hang on a minute, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Right? Maybe
Yeah.
we can actually trust these organizations.
Well, look at the work the
they're
Gates,
getting it done.
Yeah, the work that the Gates Foundation has done on AIDS.
It's amazing.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
great
been,
example.
It's been fantastic.
Yeah, it really has.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's, and the Buffetts and the Gates of the world and other, well-to-do people who have committed the huge percentage of their wealth to charitable organizations, they are designating how those funds are going to get used, and they are making a difference. And other organizations, while the gifts aren't as large, we are seeing, significant growth and development in, again, if I use healthcare as an example, you look at work that's going on in cancer. And cancer, as we all know, it's an absolutely horrible disease, and just about everybody knows somebody with or somebody who's dealt with or passed away from or whatever the unfortunate case might be. And people will often say, oh, well, the money's going. We're not making any progress. Well, I'm sorry. The extension of one's life today and the quality of life that people have as a result of, whether it's personalized cancer medicine that's taking place through a number of different organizations led by Princess Margaret, or, the research, the world research, the hub research that is happening all over the world, where projects in, whether they're in China or whether they're in Australia or whether they're in the United Kingdom or Europe or Canada or wherever, they're centralized and people are learning. They're not duplicating research as much as they used to. They're picking up on other people. They're
really
moving projects forward. It's
hear.
fantastic.
Yeah,
it is.
So there's no conspiracy, is what you're saying.
There's no
Peter.
conspiracy
I've
theory.
heard conspiracy theories about cancer before.
No, I've heard those too.
It's all about making money.
They don't want to find a cure. That's right.
Yeah.
No. Sorry, that's
no,
not
I
true.
think Big Pharma wants to find a cure. That would be my sense.
Everybody wants to find a cure.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, tell me a little bit more, especially coming out of your trip to Nepal. No doubt this has changed your life in a variety of ways. I've read some of your blogs and reports and so on, seen the photos of the crazy flight you and I chatted about out on the helicopter and so on. This is going to stay with you for the rest of your life. It's going to resonate.
No question.
In a variety of ways, and you can't even probably know that at this point. How? Tell me a little bit now about how your level of awareness of the majority world, of developing world-like issues, is more prominent for you. It's more in your face. It's you find yourself talking about it more often at dinner parties, or you're more willing to listen to somebody else's message about an issue somewhere else in the world. And one of the things I've found so challenging, Peter, is how do you get people excited about a place like Cambodia? How do you get people excited about a place like Burkina Faso? By the way, Ouagadougou, the capital city, you got to love a place that's called
Ouagadougou.
Anyway, tell me about that a little bit. Are you seeing a shift in your own thinking?
Well,
is it about getting the donor on the ground? I guess is another question.
Well, there's no question that is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
But that's been around for years.
Yeah,
so you think back to the World Vision and the direct response television they've done, where well-known people go over as spokespeople, and they actually see, and it changes their lives. So I wouldn't say. You made the comment sort of as it changed my life. I wouldn't say that it's changed my life, because when I first went to Kilimanjaro, people said, it's changed my life.
Right.
It gave me an awful lot to think about my life, about the things that that I have and we have, how fortunate we are, how fortunate I am, but. In terms of changing my life, no. Has it influenced my life? Absolutely. And to your point, yes, it will stay with me for the rest of my life. From the very first moment that we arrived in Kathmandu, and, you leave a nice city of Toronto, and, there's cleanliness and organization and,
hot coffee.
Just every
running water.
And then you arrive at Kathmandu, and it's totally chaotic.
Yes.
Everybody's trying, and everybody's and we get into the taxi, and I think I mentioned to you the very nice, well-spoken Nepalese young man says, I just want to tell you right off the bat here. He said the rules of driving in Kathmandu. There aren't any.
Yes.
So I said, you mean everything goes? Absolutely, sir. Everything goes. And he said, the 2 traffic lights we have, we don't have them turned on because we're saving energy.
That's the best. What a great story.
And it went on from there as we arrived at our hotel, which was a very nice hotel. It's a very well-known climbing hotel called the Yak and Yeti. And so they have all the luxuries. The power goes off 2 or 3 times a day. That's part of
Pretty
the way.
Standard, yeah.
Yep, that's the way it works. And then we ventured out into Tamil, the local shopping area, which is the rip-off, the copycat market of the world, and I mean, as you saw maybe on the story I wrote, I had some pictures of sort of the electric wires, and it's just total chaos and people coming and going. But at the end of the day, the important thing is it works. People are not angry. people are happy. They're to their way of existence and to their lifestyle.
Sure. Yep.
They're
It certainly seems less complicated in a way, doesn't it? It seems
a lot.
I don't know if that's always a fair representation,
Right.
because I think in a lot of countries like Nepal, you've got political issues that we're not dealing with. You've got health issues that we're
That's
not
right.
dealing with,
That's
and
right.
these things are going to create a whole other level of stress that
They
we
do.
have no idea.
That's right.
Right.
And in talking
you
to
can't underestimate.
No,
that.
and in talking to the people about things that are important to them, those are the things that come
They
up.
are.
Education and health
Yeah.
and lifestyle and right.
The more people I meet, the more countries I go to, I mean, it seems to me we're all sort of, I love the phrase, we're all in this together, and most of us are looking for the same things, I think.
That's right.
When it comes down to it. Education, health, clean water, access.
Interestingly, though, I did find, by comparison, having been to Tanzania and Nepal,
Right.
I did find that the Tanzanian people, by comparison, were more at peace with themselves.
Interesting.
My observation,
Yeah.
more at peace with themselves, more happy with their situation in life. Yes, they want things better. I'm not suggesting that at all. But they couldn't have been, and not to say that Nepalese weren't, because they were as well. They were helpful, they were friendly. I never felt at any time in either city, I never felt at risk or concerned about, having something stolen or having something, being hit or anything of that. I just never did. And maybe that's just me. Others may have different opinions, but I came back, particularly from Kathmandu, from Tanzania, having been twice, and so the second time saying, okay, so was that just first impression, or was that? And so I looked for it,
It's interesting.
stuff like that, and talked to people, and again, in Nepal we had the opportunity, although the use of the English language is limited, and even through our guide who was translating, you wonder what may have got misinterpreted.
Lost in translation.
Yeah,
for sure.
But we had some great conversations with people about their life and
Well, some of my fondest memories, I think, of all the traveling I've done are the folks I met.
Yeah.
The stories, the
That's
drinks I've
what
had
it's all
with
about.
people late at night, or the meal we had, or the drive, the 8-hour drive that was supposed to only take two.
Two, right. Yep.
Or whatever the case might be. And,
Yep.
and I love the fact that you sort of started with your impression of Nepal was the taxi driver.
Oh yeah.
Which is so great. So it's not changed your life, but it's influenced you.
Definitely.
Do you think there's going to be things that you're going to do differently as a result of this?
Oh, I've already started doing some things differently in terms of my priorities. I mean, it was not a domineering component of my decision to move on in life and sell the company, but it was certainly a contributing. So I do want to do some more traveling, and I do want to look into doing some third world volunteer work.
Do you see yourself on a couple boards in the next couple of years, maybe?
In which?
On boards of some organizations that you align
Oh,
yourself with?
if that opportunity was available, absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
But more
Becoming
importantly,
a little more active, a little more aware.
Yeah, but I love the on the ground work.
Yeah, sure. That's great.
I rather get involved with the people and see the one-to-one
Right.
influence and outcomes. That to me is more rewarding. It's
For
very very
sure.
rewarding.
You can't beat being in the field. That's for sure on the ground.
I mean, one of the things we did, as many people do when they leave, is they left. We left various items with the folks that had helped us, and that just their appreciation is just
sure.
it's a small thing for us, but such a huge thing for them, and that's incredibly rewarding.
That's great. We're coming near to the end of our interview today, but I wanted to ask you. You're quoted in the book. I talked about FaceTime earlier, and you mentioned something about having. We all have a lot of acquaintances. Is the quote? It's a paraphrase, but very few friends.
Right.
And in that was obviously Robert Peacock was writing that in relationship to the whole notion of fundraising and cultivation and developing and building relationships with high net worth donors and direct mail and so on.
Right.
Obviously, that's applicable in other areas. Where did that come from for you? Is that just as a result of your own experience? Is this something you read, or is that become kind of a truth in this field for you?
Well, it's certainly beyond or pre my getting into the world of fundraising. It's really just sort of been one of my observations in life, quite frankly.
Right.
And we see it when, when difficult situations crop up, not necessarily tragic situations, but difficult situations for people. And, I've heard many people say, gosh, I thought that so-and-so would be available to help me, or, I've reached out to, and, it just, you really, that's sort of where that came from in my opinion, that, we all talk about, I hear people saying, I got lots of friends. And I really believe, I guess it depends how you want to define friend versus acquaintance.
Sure, yeah.
But I think we have lots of associates, we have lots of acquaintances, but friends are very near and very dear. And they may or may not be family members, because there are lots of family members who are not necessarily near and dear, unfortunately. I've been fortunate in the family I've come from and been brought up in that is the case. But again, talking to, friends, neighbors, about their family situations, I just shake my head. I mean, how unfortunate that the
the whole
flesh and blood of the
like
family,
his enemies, right?
Exactly. So, but in terms of how that connects to fundraising, I think it does because maybe the best example is when we do acquisition mailings, looking for new donors. We might get, pick a number. We get 500 new donors. And those we always call suspects in the business because they've made a gift, so that's nice. But are they really donors? So what is a donor, and what's the definition of a donor? And we've always said, and many of us in the industry talk about, we don't really have a donor to our organization until they've made the second or even in some cases the third gift, and then there's more of a commitment and understanding, a relationship that has been created. And so it's the same thing. That to me is the connection. We've got lots of suspects, we've got lots of associates, we've got lots of acquaintances, but in terms of donors and friends, we don't have. We have very few, and we want on our side. Now we get into the loyalty factor, which is from the donor side. We get into the stewardship factor, which deals with the organizational side, and there's a disconnect.
Right.
A real disconnect there.
And I think, to come back sort of almost full circle in a way, and I do like to do that from time to time in these interviews, you talked about listening pretty early on in our
That's
interview,
right.
And we're kind of back there, it seems to me.
That's right.
We're building relationships, we're talking about the taxi driver in Nepal, and what is that going to mean for you personally and for potentially, for others as well, right, down the road. Yeah, I mean, it's such a cliche. It's all about relationships, but
it is.
But to me, it's about unpacking what that actually means. Now. So if somebody says that in the room, great.
What do you mean?
Now, what do you mean by that?
Yep.
Do you mean?
And how do you define that?
And how do you define?
And how are you going to execute on
that?
that?
How are you going to execute?
That's right.
Yeah. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's been my
there's
pleasure.
So much more going on.
There
that
is.
Meets the eye. And we barely scratched the surface, and we're 42 minutes in. So really appreciate your time. And maybe we'll do a part 2 in a couple of years when you've hit 3 or 4 more countries. Maybe
that would be
Any
great.
more mountains to climb?
No more mountains.
No more mountains.
No.
Okay.
I thought maybe, but not sure my knees will put up with it.
Excellent. Anyway, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, David.